So, welcome everybody. I think we'll make a start. I think we're all here. Our last session tonight. I hope you've enjoyed it. Tonight we'll start with our big question. We've had, what is it? How are you? Where are they? Well, tonight it's, I think I take my cue from Life, the Universe and Everything. Douglas Adams, do you remember the book? He said the answer was 42. Well, I think we can do a bit better than that. So I'm going to ask the big question. But nobody was quite sure what the question was. But anyway, this is the question I'd like to address tonight, which is what matters, what really matters in life. And I want to begin with science, which is an amazing pursuit in itself. As Jacob pointed out to us last week, the subject matter of science lies open for anybody to discover. And our scientific understanding of the world advances like a tide. And it actually advances quite rapidly. In my youth, we understood very little about the Earth, scientifically, and how it worked with life. Plate tectonics was just being proposed. Biochemistry was still in its infancy. James Lovelock talked about the Earth as one great system of life in the 80s, but it was very controversial at the time. Now it is established beyond reasonable doubt, and Earth system science is a vital discipline. What is scientific method? My summary of it would be something like this. Careful observation, repeatable experiments, the simplest explanation possible, and published results. Now you can elaborate that definition as much as you like, but those four things explain a little bit about the way that we do science. I think scientific discovery is actually a great example of worldwide cooperation, and it produces knowledge we can largely trust. Good science does, peer-reviewed science. And yet, to some of us, I don't know if you went to school and whether you found it exciting or whether you found it dry and boring. I guess different people find it differently. A mass of detail, perhaps. As a young scientist myself, I was really fortunate to be trained in a great laboratory. There were Nobel Prize winners down the corridor. And at a time when there was a serious technological breakthrough, which we now know as monoclonal antibodies. But it meant that at one point, I was able to go into my lab each day. At that time, I was working on the placenta, to do an experiment and end up looking down the microscope at the end of each day at something no one had ever seen before. And that was really exciting and a great privilege. But of course, it was not always like that. There was detail to do. There was hard grind. You couldn't take shortcuts in defining your approach, your experiment. And sometimes it could feel like a very narrow world. Mealtime conversations about science were not always appreciated, even by my spouse. Sometimes you could feel rather like a miner chipping away at a coalface, miles from the light of day that other people were experiencing. So it could feel like a very specialized investigation that you were involved in. But hey, the best science, as I see it, is the science that is also imaginative enough to make connections. One of the people, well, perhaps I think is one of the most important scientists we've never heard of, is a guy called Alexander von Humboldt. He lived around 1800. Before we divided science into lots of different disciplines, for him he was investigating the whole thing. No, in 1800 was when he went to South America. So this is one of his diagrams. This is a mountain in South America. I think it's called Chimborazo. And what he's done is he's plotted all the plants that he identified on the mountain and at what height they are. And then he's put lots of other mountains down here and where those plants are found. So he amassed an enormous amount of detail, and he measured everything. So he measured the height and the latitude and the longitude and everything about everything. He wanted to know everything. And he wanted to make connections. He was the first person really to think in terms of an ecosystem. Lots of the botanists, etc., were just effectively stamp collecting at the time. But Alexander von Humboldt wanted to understand how they all fitted together. And he also wanted to understand how humans fitted into the picture. So the Spaniards came to him one day and said, "Why is this lake dried up?" And he went back to them and said, "Well, that's because you've taken the forest down. You've changed the whole ecosystem, you've ruined the soils, and now the lake's dried up." So he could see humans in the whole picture. And remember, this is over 200 years ago. So it was a fantastic insight. So I love Alexander von Humboldt and what he did. You know, he went on till he was 86, writing his famous work, his big work called Cosmos, which was trying to describe the human mind in relation to the physical universe, really. I think how he'd put it. So science and the pursuit of science is an amazing thing, I think. Somehow, we human beings are able to understand the world around us like no other creature before us. And it's given us great power and great responsibility. It's a bit of a mystery, in my view, as to how we have this ability. It's like the world has been created in a way that suits our human brains, perhaps. Anyway, in the language of this course, I think the fourth mystery is what I call revelation, the revelation of science. It is the fact that we've come to understand this enormous amount about the earth. We've encountered four mysteries in this course. I've described as energy, life, consciousness, and now revelation. Are they really mysteries? You might have gone away thinking, "Oh, I'm not sure that's a mystery," or whatever. And I think in the end, for me, I call them mysteries because each of them, energy, life, consciousness, revelation, is a subject worthy of contemplation, something to dwell on, rich and potentially life-changing. That's why I call them mysteries. So it's been revealed to us through science that the earth is a living system, an ecosystem of ecosystems, and it is immensely powerful. It's this immense power of the earth that I'd like to dwell on for a moment. How do we know that the earth is powerful? We know that there have been massive extinctions in its history. At times, like the great extinction of 250 odd million years ago, when almost all the life in the oceans was wiped out and most of the land species were lost as well. And as we continue to pump greenhouse gases into the air, we know we risk a new wave of extinction and great tragedy and social chaos for us humans as well as for the rest of nature. So I think it's worth focusing on the immense power of the earth. I think it's a power in a whole different league from the other powers that we're used to thinking about. So, we might think, particularly those environmentally minded of us, might think the great powers today were the fossil fuel companies. Or perhaps we might think it's the financial institutions. Or, more deeply, our own pervasive individualism. Those are great powers, it seems to me, but they're in a wholly different league from the power of the earth. Or we might think of our struggles, the struggles we're engaged with now, really deep and important struggles for us as human beings. Gaza, Ukraine. Maybe we recognize some struggles with social media or AI. And they're important, but they're in a whole different league from the power of the earth. In 100 years, Gaza and Ukraine will be written about in history books, a tale of infamy. But the people of that day won't be suffering from them. But climate change, in 100 years' time, the people will look back on today and say, what did they do? Why didn't they respond? So you see, the earth is enormously powerful, and what we do today will rebound for centuries to come down the ages. It may affect almost all the species on Earth and create tragic consequences on a scale never before seen by humanity. So the Earth is powerful and fascinating, all at the same time. And that is taught to us by science. Let me ask you, do you believe that the Earth is immensely powerful? Is that, yeah? Are you happy with that idea? Well, not happy, but you're with that idea? Now let me ask you a different question. Do you feel that the earth is immensely powerful? That might be a different answer. Because we can know something in our head, but not actually feel it, and so react to it in our lives. I guess there's a certain dread coming upon some young people today. I've certainly felt that in conversations with them. And I guess us oldies are less aware or less fearful, less dreading the future. So it hasn't really hit us yet, and I wonder why. If we're such rational beings as we think we are, as we pretend we are, then surely we should feel this stuff. But we don't. And we're not as rational as we pretend to be, actually. So we, therefore, because I would argue because we don't feel it, we aren't willing to change our ways or adapt our civilizations as radically or as urgently as we need to. So how can we respond? How can we begin to feel our relationship with the earth? I believe, and this is controversial, I don't mind how you feel about it, I'm just going to say it. I believe that science is teaching us that the earth is sacred. Let me unpack that for you a little, because our secular age has rather lost touch with that idea. Certainly with the feelings that accompany the sacred. Traditional peoples didn't understand very much about the world, but they felt themselves to be very vulnerable. They typically used their imaginations to try to understand how to live well and what decisions to make about their lives. So many of them would develop sacred places, special places, which would form the centre of their homeland. If they were nomadic people, they might, for example, when they got to a new place, put a spear in the ground, and that would orient the whole community in terms of the sacred. Or later settled communities would build sacred places like temples or churches. Many of them would develop rules about food and ceremony, and they dare not offend this whole world of imagination. So they had this quite elaborate system, sacred system, which was about, partly at least, their own safety and well-being. In other words, they oriented their whole lives around the sacred. Living in such a world was to recognize the power of the sacred. They thought they mustn't offend, or great forces might be unleashed against them. They also had very strong ideas about pollution. So their sacred spaces must be kept scrupulously free from any taint, any uncleanness. Their foods were frequently designated clean or unclean. Pollution was a major threat, even if they didn't understand why. And their communities held a whole series of gatherings through the year focused on the sacred, which helped to bind people together and inspire their mutual imagination. So I wonder what you make of that today. Many, when you tell that sort of story to people, many would say, well, all that is obsolete. All those science has rendered that whole way of thinking obsolete. And I half agree, but only half. Before we write it off, I think we need to go deeper into what the sacred really is. Because I think the sacred can be a gateway to a set of feelings and a creativity which we no longer have in our secular world. Rudolf Otto famously described the concept of the sacred as most of all an experience of something that was mysterious, powerful, and fascinating, all at the same time. He studied all the religions of the world. That was how he came to that. And he said the common denominator is an experience of the mysterious, the powerful, and the fascinating. And interestingly, if we ask that question about the earth, well, I think you could say it is mysterious and powerful and fascinating. I came across this from the Union of Concerned Scientists. As scientists, many of us have had profound experiences of awe and reverence before the universe. We understand that what is regarded as sacred is more likely to be treated with care and respect. Our planetary home should be so regarded. Efforts to safeguard and cherish the environment need to be infused with a vision of the sacred. And that was written by scientists. I would have liked to ask them if they really felt that, or whether they just thought it was a good idea. Because that's the real difficulty. How do we get to feel these things, it seems to me? It is surely true that if we offend against the earth, great forces might be unleashed against us. And that is no longer a primitive superstition. It's the teaching of science. It's like science has revealed to us what ancient peoples felt but did not understand. There is a power They must order their lives in harmony with that power. They must avoid pollution of all kinds. It was dangerous. We now understand the earth is such a power, in a different league from everything else that we worry about. We know that we're polluting it seriously with our greenhouse gases, our plastic, our pesticides, and so much more. And I would argue that we need an experience like how traditional people felt towards the sacred, even while understanding the earth through science. So science, in a sense, teaches us that the earth is sacred, is my suggestion to you. And in fact, that this idea that science has rendered the sacred obsolete is fourth falsehood of Western civilization. I recognise this is a hard one. To put science together with the sacred is to put two things together that we've not been brought up to be able to manage at all as two ideas. As soon as you say sacred in our society, people tend to think of shamans and strange rituals, rain dances, and going back to superstitious ways. But that's not what I mean. Somehow we have to hold science together with the sacred, it seems to me, in relation to the earth. And how we do that, I don't know. And we're going to have a break now. And I want you to, if you would, I'd like you to think about that. Just to say that in terms of resources, if any of you have read Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmerer does a good fist of trying to combine science and a sort of indigenous people's understanding of the world. Robin being one of the first peoples of America. So let's have a break. We probably need it after that because that was difficult to cope with. And we'll come back and talk more practically after the break. So I'd like to go on now and think about what this might mean in practice. To recognise the earth as sacred, even in this scientific sense. Maybe to enter an experience, to participate in a new way of being, to submit to a new reality. And I believe it needs to be discovered as a community. And it's a community phenomenon that needs to be discovered as a community rooted in a local area. Because that's how it was always known in the past. In a community, in a local area. We are already a community of people, to a degree. Sorry. That description already describes at least several hundred people in this community, creatively engaging with their local area in order to make peace with the earth. But we might not put it in those terms. But let's have a think about it for a minute and see what we are doing. And I like to think of traditional cultures in terms of places, time, and people. Some of you will know about our community nature reserve. 250 gardens or something around here where people have deliberately welcomed wildlife into their gardens, thought about their relationship with the natural world. And our public spaces, like our parks and our lanes, as places not just for human community, but for all of nature. Some of us here already tend one or more spaces with great care and thought. We may use it as a space not just for working in for the jobs we have to do today, but also for contemplation. And I wonder if that space, thinking of that space that some of you already cultivate, could be for you a place that speaks to you about your relationship with the whole earth, not just the garden. Because I think at that moment it almost becomes a sacred space. So maybe we're on the verge of some of this stuff. Let's think about time. It's surely true that in this community we're already putting together something of an annual calendar of events themed around the earth. We have a spring gathering, we have an autumn gathering, we have an Earth Fest in the summer. We have other things like nature photography competitions and fashion shows and clothes swaps. Well, this is quite close to a sacred calendar, actually, themed on the earth, where all sorts of ways in which we're gathering together and creatively imagining our relationship with the earth. A series of events that remind us all of the earth and our potential commitment to live well in response to it, and help us be creative and imaginative. And then there are the people. Lots of different groups forming, each distinctive but overlapping. Friends of Emerson's Green Park, Friends of Black Horse Common, the Town Council's Community Nature Reserve, Emerson's and Lyde Community Energy, the Climate and Nature Group, and there may be more that I haven't listed there, but local groups of people who are all doing something themed on the earth. I see this as one community of people who in different ways are trying to respond to today. And there are several hundred people already in that community. It's very hard to say how many people are in anything these days, but I'm confident there are several hundred, and at the autumn gathering next Saturday, we'll give that a plug, Bobby, there will be a couple of hundred people, I'm sure. So in many ways, we're already mimicking the life of a traditional community, oriented around the earth as sacred. So what more do we need to do? I believe we need to go deeper at this point. That's partly why I put this course on. Not necessarily to make us more busy, but to encourage us to be more spiritual and more creative. I would suggest we need to own this idea of the earth as sacred, and to work in full accord with the best science. And to work on our creative imagination, or how we create shared imagination as a people. And that's a creative task, like we were thinking about last week. How do we? So if we understand these things about the earth, how do we communicate them? How do we communicate them, for example, to many of the people in these groups are very practical people. They're not used to thinking in this way at all. And so the challenge for me is how do you convey this sort of thing through maybe many of the things we're doing, through the activities of the groups and the sacred spaces, the calendar of events, and the gatherings of the people. How do we convey creatively some sense of? Now, we don't have to go into all the detail we've gone into in this course. In some ways, I've been exploring what I think about these things in this course. I've been trying to nail it down, trying to understand it. And it's been a year or more in its gestation. And it doesn't have to be just like I've said. But I suppose what I'm pleading for is something like this, where we're creating shared imagination between us that will become the heart of this community and will reach out right to the edges of this community that's growing, even the people who don't see themselves as anything like spiritual at all. And because then I think our lives will begin to change as they need to. Then I think we will be really living what we need to be in this generation. Our work in Emerson's Green is already attracting attention. People ask to do their events here. They want to hear our stories. They want to come and film things. That's a good sign. But I believe there's much more. There is the potential for doing something quite deep and quite inspiring in this community. And I'd love to do it with you.